we are exactly 1 month out from the now twice rescheduled court hearings that could spell freedom for Lyle and Erik Menendez, but just as likely, might not. A lot has changed since those brothers went to prison. For starters, they were lifers after murdering their parents in '89, sentenced to die there in prison. But now that is up for debate. And just in the last few months, things have changed even more. The previous district attorney in LA had become their unlikely ally, but he was booted. And the new DA in charge, he's not quite a cheerleader. And I, for one, have been wondering how, for months, I've been wondering how these brothers are processing these lightning-fast changes as they watch it all unfold from behind the prison walls. And lo and behold, tonight we know. I am devoting a very big chunk of this hour to a remarkable, wide-ranging interview with Lyle and Erik Menendez. It was conducted by TMZ's Harvey Levin and the brothers' own attorney, Mark Garagos. And it was part of their brand new podcast called Two Angry Men, and it is a great podcast. In the first joint interview that these brothers have done in over 30 years, and I should say that's partly because they were held separately for 2 decades, more than 2 decades they were held apart. They were reunited in 2018 at the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility, that's near San Diego, when Lyle was transferred into the prison where his brother Erik had been. The first time in 21 years they'd seen each other. But just imagine them. Like, seriously, just think about this for a second. They're side by side at the prison phone bank, right? And they're passing this like landline receiver back and forth in this 4-way, no-holds-barred conversation. We're going to hear directly from Harvey Levin in a minute, but first I want you to hear Erik, the younger Menendez, telling Harvey and Mark about what 35 years of incarceration has been like.
Prison was hard for me. I faced a lot of bullying and trauma. It was a dangerous environment.
What happened to you?
I was picked on, bullied violently, and it was traumatic, and it was continual. And, you know, there's the things that a lot of inmates in prison go through, and when they're not part of a gang structure and they come in and they're basically lone wolf, you know, they just have to be by themselves. And prison can be hard, and there's a lot of suffering in prison. So, and I wasn't, I'm not going to fight back. I'm not going to, engage. And I had no one to really to turn to for help. And I was separated from Lyle. And I remember the day that I was told Lyle just got assaulted and got his jaw broken. And it was, I'm thinking, he's over there, I'm going through this over here, and at least we could protect each other maybe if we were together, but we were not even allowed to be together. So it was difficult, and it didn't, that's why it took years to work out of it, because you have to find yourself in prison. And I will say that prisons, I believe that corrections is doing their best, and I want to work with them. I know Lyle is really changing that culture today. They're really trying, but 25 years ago it was an even darker, more dangerous place.
So that was Erik Menendez speaking from prison to Harvey Levin and Mark Garagos. And we also learned today that the brothers have, in fact, been able to see bits and pieces of that Netflix series that dramatized the murder of their parents, Jose and Kitty, and also the trials that followed. So this is now Lyle Menendez telling Harvey and Mark how he reacted to seeing himself and his brother portrayed that way on screen.
I want to ask you a question that's sort of in the TMZ wheelhouse, just because so many people have talked about this Ryan Murphy limited series on you and Erik. Do you have any opinion about it? Were you able to see it based on what you know? What do you think?
We were able to see quite a bit of it. I watched some of it through video chat that they allow us to do here, and obviously we've seen a million clips of it on TV and heard a lot about it. So we feel like we've seen the entire thing. We have not yet. To me, it's just a funny thing. The media and Ryan Murphy's project was very widely disseminated, and it really did actually move a lot of people to understand the childhood trauma that Erik and I suffered, and particularly the horrific stuff that Erik suffered. Cooper Koch's rendition of Erik and his trauma was pretty extraordinary. And so was actually Nicholas's. So I feel a lot of people were educated about what can happen even in rich, in affluent homes behind walls and behind hedges, and manicured lawns. And so I think it opened a lot of people's eyes, and that's always a good thing. Abuse, it requires being in the shadows of society, because once you bring a spotlight on it, the bullying and the trauma tends to find healing or find recourse. And so I feel like shining a light on it, Ryan Murphy did, and his project ended up doing that. And so in that way, I think we are grateful.
Grateful. That is a very, very different tune than when it first came out, right? They weren't happy at all with how they were perceived, but they hadn't seen it. They'd only heard snippets. A little while ago, I checked in with my old friend Harvey Levin about the wide-ranging conversation that he and Mark had with the Menendez brothers. Have a look. Harvey, what an unbelievable interview, especially to hear them together. Is this the first time that they've interviewed together in I want to say decades?
Well, it's as far as I know, it's the first time they've done any interview together for the 35 years they've been in prison. Remember, for the first 21, they were separated.
Right. They were apart, so they couldn't possibly have done that. And the mechanics of doing this, I was envisioning in my head that they are at a phone bank together using the same phone and passing
the phone
between
back and
their
forth.
ears. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, this was a prison phone call, and they would pass the phone back and forth. There were interruptions where you heard, this call is being recorded, you have 60 seconds left, and they ended up having to call back twice. And Ashleigh, I accepted all 3 collect calls, just so you know, for the record.
Going to have to line item that in the budget, right. Harvey. I heard it, and I remember thinking how beautifully raw this interview was. It sounded so immediate because of that. It was a true prison experience that so many people do go through when they try to, connect with their loved ones in prison. I have to say, like, the takeaway I got, and I don't know if this is yours, was that these were men I didn't expect to hear. I felt like these were very rehabilitated men.
I could not agree with you more. It stunned me because I covered the trial. And at one point I even said to Erik, look, Erik, I covered this trial. And what I walked away with during the trial was you and Lyle were spoiled brats. And it wasn't just me saying it, a lot of people were saying it. And he owned it and said, we were spoiled brats. And he said that we had insecurities and we felt we could cover them up with expensive clothes and fancy cars, and it's hollow and we know it. And then he started getting into what matters. And these are 2 guys who have thought a lot about what they did wrong, what they want their lives to be. And the thing that really struck me maybe the most, Ashleigh, is think about it. They have a sentence of life without the possibility of parole, which means, until a year ago when this new evidence surfaced, they had exhausted their appeals. They were going to be in prison forever. I wondered myself, if I were in that circumstance, would I try to better myself? Would I get a college degree? Would I start a hospice program? Would I help people who are thinking of suicide? Would I create this green space program? Would I do any of that? Well, they did all of it. And it's when they had no hope of ever even getting out. So this isn't just performative, where they're doing this for a judge to get out of prison. They were doing this for their lives. And they're fundamentally different people.
You're so right. They call it toe tag parole, right? In the true crime business, it means you're not getting out of prison unless you're wearing a toe tag. Right. And faced with that, I have to be honest, Harvey, I don't know that I would get over that why bother, metric. And they certainly have. The other interesting part that I got out of this call was that they want to continue doing that, not just on the outside if they're free, but to continue helping prisoners to rehabilitate, to be better people. They know now how it works on the inside. They know what programs work, what makes prisoners less recidivist, back in the clink after you get let out. That was the most eye-opening, because isn't that what prison is about? Let's make people better. One prong of it.
Yeah, and look, they absolutely said that their life's mission is going to be just what you said, whether they're in prison or out of prison. And a lot of cynical people could say, well, they're just saying that they're going to get out and they're just going to go back to live the life they did. I got to tell you, this felt so authentic to me. I mean, you hear the passion about what they've done, and this has been their adult life. I mean, this is not like, okay, we did it for a couple of years. They've done it for 35 years. So this really does define their life, their time in prison. And it's something that they're not just going to shed when they walk out. I mean, this is the core of their lives, the things they've been doing. And they have an absolute passion for this if they get out.
And it's interesting they both did it. They both came to this sort of mission separately, because they were apart for 21 years. And they came in as young people, right? Like barely out of college sort of young people. So it wasn't as though they had the wisdom of being adults to say, well, I better do something good with my life. It just happened. It really did just happen for both of them separately. I was really taken by Erik's comment about being bullied. And it sounded like he was understating a physical and mental abuse that he was enduring as a lonely prisoner without his brother or any other protectors. And then talked about what it was like to hear that Lyle had been assaulted and had his jaw broken. I would love to get your take on that one repartee between you, because I felt like he wanted to say more and just held back.
God, you really picked up on something, because early on in our conversation, he mentioned being bullied. And I had a bunch of things to ask him. And at the very end, the last thing I did was I said, look, you had said something that's stuck in my head about being bullied. And he was vague. And I pushed him and said, what happened to you? And he didn't want to fully open up. And frankly, I don't think he did fully open up, but he said enough. He said he was viciously bullied. And think about it. I mean, he is a young guy. He had killed his parents. The image of him was terrible. This greedy guy who killed his mother and father. He is a celebrity when he goes in, and he's essentially defenseless. So you put all of that together, and the same really with Lyle, and it is a recipe for violence. And that's exactly what happened. So, yeah, you're right. I don't think I heard anywhere near the scope of what this was, but I heard enough. And he was saying repeatedly, viciously bullied, didn't fight back. As you said, Lyle had his jaw broken, and God knows what else happened to Lyle. So, yeah, they endured a lot.
Lyle also said that, and this was really heartbreaking, that he was the first person to testify about being a male victim of sexual abuse, and that he took it on the chin, and that's an understatement. They were crucified. They were humiliated. They were the stuff of SNL skits,
They were on, they were on us. They were. SNL did a bunch on them.
Yeah, and I'm sure they're very apologetic of the way they treated the Menendez brothers, knowing now what we know.
Right.
But he also said that this is the mission, right? Because he lived through the humiliation for decades of what it meant to be a Menendez brother who testified about this on the trial. He wants to make sure that others in and out of prison who have endured sexual abuse as males and as females, I'm sure, never, ever, ever get the same treatment that he and his brothers got.
Yeah. Mark Garagos is my co-host on this podcast and represents the Menendez brothers. And Mark said, and I think he's right, if they were the Menendez sisters, they'd be out. And there is something to say for that. And Mark very strongly believes it. And by the way, as you know, this is not going to be a retrial of the murder case. They have been convicted. They own it. This is about whether they have served enough of a sentence and that whether they have been rehabilitated and are not a threat to society anymore. And that really should be the focus of this resentencing hearing. And so this is not about a pound of flesh. This is not about an eye for an eye. This is specifically about what I just said. And when you look at those elements, they check those boxes. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in court.
The district attorney who pushed for the brothers' resentencing and was voted out in November cited their ample evidence of rehabilitation. The current DA, though, and many others, are just as swayed by the viciousness of the crimes. It did not help the Menendez brothers' case that their murdered parents' bodies were barely cold when the boys went on a spending spree. $15,000 on watches, $64,000 on a Porsche, a $300,000 deposit on a restaurant, not to mention clothes and houses and tennis lessons. So it is no surprise that Lyle and Erik came off as scheming, entitled homicidal brats, spoiled to the core. Harvey Levin asked Erik about exactly that in the interview that he and Mark Geragos just conducted for their new podcast, Two Angry Men. Here is Erik's response.
I grew up in an affluent home. I was a spoiled brat. I had deep insecurity issues and tried to hide those issues, and I was taught that you do it through the best clothes or the best car or whatever of those things that we now know is completely dysfunctional and frankly just a sign of internal pain. And I was also a teenager, and so I look at teenagers now and I think if I were to see an 18-year-old come onto a prison yard now, I would think that person's not safe. Like I don't look at that person and say, oh, you have all of your stuff together and you know what's going on and you have a good sense of self. So I think that my youth and deeply misguided, imprinted ideas of what success meant in life were reflected in your sentiment, and I'm not surprised that you felt that way. I look back and I'm so ashamed and embarrassed about even the little things that I did in life, and I'm not sure anyone looks back on their teenage years and is really fully proud of themselves. Maybe you are, Harvey. I'm sure Mark is, but
I'm sure Mark is too.
I'm not that person, but who I've evolved into, who I've seen Lyle evolve into, I'm beginning to like myself and be proud of myself and find it okay to like myself and not hate myself.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
What happened to me as a child. So I think that's an accurate sentiment, and I'm striving to be a good person, and I'm striving to be a better person every day, and I want to be a person that my family can be proud of, for certain. I want my daughter to be proud of me, and my wife to be proud of me, and my extended family to be proud of me, and my brother to be proud of me. And so that's who I am today.
I told you, right, at the top of the show, I told you. There is a lot going on here. And there is so much more that the brothers said in that 40-minute interview. So I asked Harvey about what they plan to do if they're released and how they've come around to that wildly successful Netflix series. Erik and Lyle both talked about the programs that they have initiated in prison. I was fascinated about the green space and trees, right? Just the simple notion of putting trees inside the prison yard can help in recidivism. Literally, that's the message. You know, expose prisoners to nature. They will be less violent. They will get paroled, right? Many will. And they said they just keep coming back. And then dogs. Bring a dog into the prison. I can't remember, it was Erik or Lyle said, I hadn't seen a dog in decades or felt a dog. And having a dog lick my hand changed everything. But just these small things that don't cost a lot of money that might help society from being victimized again from those who do get paroled.
And that's why I think they can be really, I'll quote Arnold Schwarzenegger's book, useful. They can be really useful because they've lived it. They've lived it all of their adult lives. And, they're in their mid-50s now. And they can do a lot of good because they've seen it. And they see what goes wrong and how it can go right. And you're right. When prison becomes a revolving door and people, keep going back and back and back and back, it's not just them who loses, we all lose. And they have an experience that a legislator doesn't have. And they could be extremely effective in changing things. And it doesn't necessarily even mean, like you said, changing things that's going to cost a lot of money. Some of this stuff really doesn't cost anything, but it can transform their lives. And shouldn't that be the point here? And especially people who will get out. Don't you want them out where they're not going to commit crimes again? It's so simple. And that if that's the goal, and it should be, and not just retribution, we're going to have a better country.
And I don't want to pay for them to be prosecuted again and incarcerated again. I mean, it's more expensive to do that than plant a tree or get a therapy dog once a week into the system. Hey, one super interesting aspect that I think you discovered was when Ryan Murphy's Netflix series Monster came out. The first reaction from either one or both of the brothers was that they were not happy about it. They were not happy what they'd heard about how they were characterized. It seems like they've done a complete about-face because they've actually been able to see clips on television and do some video sharing on tablets. They haven't seen the whole thing, but I feel like they recognize the effect that series had on society, specifically on how we now maybe understand more about the sexual abuse they endured.
Yeah, and they said that. They've seen a lot of it via what you just said, and they're very happy with it because, the Ryan Murphy portrayal showed various scenarios. From the Dominic Dunn scenario, which was harsh, and from their, inside the four walls of the house, what the Menendez brothers said happened, they portrayed that as well. But they think that part of the takeaway is something that people had never seen. They had just seen them on the stand talking about it and judging them that way. And when they saw it brought to life in this limited series, they feel it really did something important to show at least part of what they say they endured.
Yeah, I am always mindful, Harvey, and you as a lawyer are too, that there are always two sides to true crime. There are the victims and there are the perpetrators and all the people who are affected, right? So there are many, many people in the United States and elsewhere who do not agree with the notion that the Menendez brothers should be released. They exist, no matter how much the groundswell about the Netflix
in my
series.
office.
And mine too, and so I'm very mindful about that. But when you hear Kitty's sibling, Jose's siblings all saying, we want those boys out, that changes the metric of how we sort of present the story, right? Because it's a little different than the average story where the victim's families show up at every parole hearing and say, never, not like Susan Smith, right? In that respect, I'll ask this last question. Are the boys, the men, hopeful about next month?
They have hope because there was no hope for many, many years. So just the prospect of getting a hearing, making their case, gives them hope. Are they confident? No. But they have, Ashleigh, I got to say, you got to listen to this podcast and watch it because they've got this thing about how they live now, and they don't try to project too much in the future because the future has been so bleak and predetermined for so long that they don't want to do that. So they live in the day, and it is something that is stressful, although they say their concern is not their own stress, it's that they feel their family members, who are now very elderly, are stressed out over this whole thing, and it's been delayed and delayed and delayed. So they're really more concerned about them. there is hope, but it is tempered by reality, and they know that by no means are they able to bank on this happening. But it doesn't. I'll tell you, they don't. There's no bitterness in anything that I heard, and I talked to them for a long time, and I just didn't hear it. They are. I don't even want to say optimistic, but they're appropriately optimistic, whether they stay in or get out. Because even if they stay in, they're not going to stop what they're doing. They're going to keep doing this. And they found purpose in this behind bars. And I think they'll do that until they die if they stay in prison. I don't think they're going to throw in the towel because they didn't for all these years. So one way or the other, they're going to do the stuff you and I just talked about. The issue is, will they do it inside a prison or as free men?
And my great thanks to Harvey Levin. The podcast, again, right there. It's called Two Angry Men, and it is great. I did hear Lyle say he was cautiously hopeful. More than 135 years after Jack the Ripper terrorized London's East End, killing at least 5 women and sending thousands of people into a frenzy, the most infamous murder spree ever is getting almost as much attention as it did back then. And that's because a British historian recently claimed that he's got proof that Jack the Ripper was a young Polish barber named Aaron Kosminski. And it all sounds plausible enough, if not ironclad. But the Kosminski theory is far from the only one out there. My next guest has her own ideas on the Whitechapel murderer. And murder is right up her alley. Patricia Cornwell is one of the best-known, most successful true crime authors of all time, with more than 120 million copies in print. Whew. In her book, Ripper, The Secret Life of Walter Sickert, she makes the case that Jack was actually a German-born painter who's fairly well-known himself. To quote Chapel Roan, Walter Sickert would be your favorite Victorian painter's favorite Victorian painter. Sickert was also what's known as a ripperologist before we ever even had a ripperologist term. His friends claimed that he would dress up like Jack. He also painted this portrait entitled Jack the Ripper's Bedroom, none of which proves anything in itself, but we're only getting started. Patricia Cornwell is live with me now. Welcome to the program. This is awesome. I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you, Ashleigh. And I'm glad to be here. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, even though it's a very grim subject. And people tend to forget that these were unbelievably savage crimes. They were the violence in some of them is unlike anything I've ever seen. Mary Kelly was flayed to the bone. I mean, this is not some cute little Ripper walk. This was a terrible serial killer. And the evidence that I've come upon from doing 20 years of this now indicate that there were more than just those 5 women. There were other victims. And also, I believe that Jack the Ripper killed some children. And he even bragged about it in his letters. But I want to start by saying this was never my idea. I was invited to Scotland Yard in 2001, and I met with this very senior, esteemed investigator named John Grieve. And he starts talking to me about Jack the Ripper, and I'm thinking, why is he doing this? I'm interested in modern crimes. And then he wanted me to go on a tour the next day through Whitechapel. Long story short, he was basically recruiting me to start looking into this. And then he said, if you're going to do it, he says, you need to look into, quote, a chap named Walter Sickert, who was a painter. His name has come up before, and he said, I'm very suspicious of this particular person. And I said, why can't you do that? And he said, well, we can't investigate a crime when there's no one left to arrest after this many years. But I remain convinced that Walter Sickert, based on paper analysis in the letters, based on historical evidence, based on so many things, I believe he was Jack the Ripper. I know for sure he wrote some of the confessional violent letters that the police received that were signed, catch me if you can, Jack the Ripper, and that sort of thing.
It's super fascinating, and you're absolutely right. There are descendants of the great-great-great-grand category who are still emotional about their descendants dying in that way. These are victims' descendants, and so you're absolutely right. It's a case that deserves to be solved, even if Scotland Yard doesn't have the mechanism to do it. Before I go to a little bit more on Sickert, what do you think about Edward Russell's, positioning that DNA solved the case and that it was Aaron Kosminski? I guess that says a lot.
No, and look, listen, I don't believe it was Aaron Kosminski, and I absolutely do not trust this new DNA analysis. And I'm not the only one. I mean, I'm not a DNA scientist, but people who are legendary in the field, like Turi King and Adam Rutherford. Adam Rutherford says this is terrible science. He calls it basically rubbish. And Turi King has been very vocal about the same sort of thing, that there are huge questions. And I will also point out one thing that's really important. We don't know for sure that the provenance of that so-called, shawl really did belong to Catherine Eddowes. If you look at the original police sketch, a crime scene sketch that was done at the time when her body was on the pavement in Mitre Square in the city of London, there is no garment like that around her. And if you read the original police report, there is no mention of something like that. But even if there had been, the contamination of this thing is horrific because it's been handled by so many people over the years. So I do not trust.
Yeah.
I call it fake news.
I have 10 seconds left, but I'd be remiss if I didn't just list out a couple things that point to Walter Sickert, sorry. He had a hatred of women. He had an obsession with killers, especially Jack the Ripper. He painted 4 paintings of another murder, the Camden Town murder. The letters to Scotland Yard, written on what looked like his stationery with the same watermark, and DNA from a stamp also is said to have a link to Sickert. With 5 seconds left, I have to ask you, and I'm so out of time, Patricia, but will we ever definitively know, yes or no?
I don't think we're ever going to get that from DNA, even if we got lucky with finding some sequences in common, and we did with the analysis that we did. Definitively, there's just not enough evidence left. It's too late for that, but there is such a thing as circumstantial and composites, and I think it points at Sickert, and I don't think that's going to change.
Please come back again. I adore you, and you are awesome at what you do.
I adore you, and I'll come back anytime.
Yay, that's awesome. Patricia Cornwell, thank you so much, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Patricia's book is called Ripper, The Secret Life of Walter Sickert. If you've been waiting for just one more documented sighting by a trained and credible witness of an unexplained aerial phenomenon before you finally make up your mind, then tonight might just be your night. I got a new cockpit voice recording of a U.S. military pilot describing a sighting at 20,000 feet, somewhere between L.A. and San Jose, California, last September. What you're about to hear is the voices of the pilot and air traffic controllers, and it's set to computer animation. Take a look.
LA Center, Troy 2-1.
Troy 2-1, go ahead.
It's not weird, but I just had something pass underneath my wing, maybe like a football-sized object right underneath our wing.
Troy 2-1, Roger. Do you think it was a drone or?
I have no idea. I got my sensor operator looking for it on the camera right now. We'll see if we can find it. But it's like a dark gray cylindrical object, and it was probably the size of a football, and it passed maybe 10 feet under our right wing.
Troy 2-1, Roger. Thank you for the report. Keep me advised if you find anything else out.
Yeah, we'll do. We're looking for it now. And so, correction. LA Center, Troy 2-1. We got something on air-to-air radar. We're trying to get visual on it.
Troy 2-1, Roger.
And LA Center 094, bearing from us for about 60 miles is where it is now.
Troy 2-1, say again.
094, bearing from us about 60 miles away is where we're picking it up now.
LA 15,
Troy 2-1, Roger. Thank you.
All right. This guy was stopped at 14 for him because we were busy. There was some UFO
reported here, but that's all taken care of now, so you don't have to worry about it unless you want to talk to Aaron. It was earlier, but it's gone.
I may not have to worry about it, but I am plenty worried about it. This is where I call in Ben Hansen to help me make heads or tails of this. Ben is a former FBI special agent and host of UFO Witness on Discovery Plus. He managed to secure that recording that you just heard because it was not made available to the public. Ben, what is your take?
This is a really interesting case. It was actually the air traffic controller who reported it to the National UFO Reporting Center, or NUFORC. So NUFORC is actually cited in the FAA regs as one of the places where pilots can go to make reports. So first, we want to thank the controller for reporting it, and also for the pilots. This was a Homeland Security flight, actually. So they were on, I don't want to say covert, but they were on a mission, probably doing drug interdiction or something like that. And they're flying along and they see this thing. So very experienced pilots. Now this particular aircraft too is a Beechcraft 350C, which they've converted to include a very sensitive and complex radar array. So you see that dome on the top of it. It's actually there to track, drug traffickers and things like that. So when they call this thing in, this is about 2:30 in the afternoon. It's September 17th of last year. It's broad daylight. They got a good look at this thing, cylindrical, dark object that passes underneath their wings so close. So, I mean, obviously you can see there's big problems with that happening in controlled airspace like they were, and they weren't notified of any air traffic that was supposed to be in the area.
So the animation, by the way, it's so realistic, I was caught off guard. Was that sort of made with the help of those who witnessed it so that it's as accurate as it can be?
Well, in this case, my team has not spoken with the crew, as you can imagine, because the sensitivity of probably what they were doing on this mission, it wouldn't benefit them to come forward to talk to the public quite yet. We'd encourage it, yes, but this was our rendering of just based on the audio that we had. It's a guess, right? That object could have gone underneath from left to right, forward to back, we don't know. But we do know their description is pretty exact.
I'm also sort of gobsmacked by 20,000 feet, because I don't think that ground-controlled, unmanned flights can operate at that altitude. Call me crazy. I think at one point they asked if it was a drone. What's the word on the possibility of some kind of a drone activity?
So it could be. It'd be very rare, but hobby drones can go up that high. Obviously, military can as well. This occurred near what we call military operations area, but it was not in that airspace. So anyone who was flying something to test a commercial type of drone or something would have had to call in. Now, the other thing that's very interesting about this is you hear them call out what they believe they're tracking this object about 60 miles away, because they've got their own airborne radar. And the pilot calls back to air traffic control, says, we think we have it. Now, debatable whether their radar array could see something this small at 60 miles. But if true, within the 2 minutes when they called back, that would place this object going about Mach 2. Okay, from them to gain that much distance in that amount of time. So that would absolutely, in my opinion, eliminate any prosaic explanation of a drone or anything of that nature.
Mach 2 just sent chills down my spine as well. The other question I have for you, it's not the first time I've heard the description of a football-shaped object. Why do we keep hearing football-shaped objects?
Well, it kind of it brings back the description that was given of what we call the Tic Tac UFO, right? The Navy videos that emerged in the New York Times story. And so these Tic Tac shaped objects are very common now. We've heard a lot of pilots describing them. So when someone says cylindrical to me, and they don't describe any propulsion system, no wings, nothing trailing off the back of it, you might be talking about a non-conventional method of propulsion, which in itself could be very exotic. Doesn't mean it's extraterrestrial, but something very strange is going on. The other thing to point out is the radar data that we obtained. This is actual radar data where the air traffic controllers pointed out to me that were helping me with the Freedom of Information request, and they said, there's something here that that doesn't quite look right. It's noteworthy because we have 3 different primary radar returns. Those plus symbols you see on your screen indicate a strong radar return of an uncorrelated object. What that means is it's not, it doesn't have a beacon, it doesn't have a transponder. There's at least 3 different objects that showed up 10 minutes before this was reported by the crew. We don't know if it's related. However, the air traffic controller I spoke to said it looks as if this thing's going 200 to 250 knots per hour, which is 300 miles an hour.
Ben, you need to call me the next time you hear something about this. I am feeling freaked out by it, and I'm only going to feel better when you make me feel better. Ben Henson, thank you for this.
You're welcome. We'll keep you updated.
I appreciate that. All dogs are heroes, but maybe none more than K9 Hurricane, in my opinion. Hurricane was a special ops K9 with the U.S. Secret Service. His name and reputation were made on the night of October 22nd, 2014. That is when an intruder jumped the White House fence and came within 100 yards of President Obama and the First Lady, but not one step closer because of Hurricane. He met the intruder, took him down full speed, 69 pounds of Belgian Malinois. He went on to become the most decorated K9 in U.S. history. He won the Secret Service Award for Merit, the Homeland Security Award for Valor, the Animals in War and Peace Distinguished Service Medal, and too many others for me to even name here. But last week, at age 15, K9 Hurricane died. Just hours earlier, he was given an honor flight on Southwest Airlines' Freedom 1 plane for one last reunion with his teammates. Hurricane's legacy will live on through a charity called Hurricane's Heroes, which has already covered vet bills for more than 150 retired police and military dogs. If you have a doggie curled up at your feet or next to you on the couch, I invite you to give him a cuddle in Hurricane's honor. I know I will. Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your screen. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.